Does anybody remember what this seminar is about?
Technology, cybersecurity policy.
I can't hear you. Could you say it louder?
Technology, cybersecurity policy.
Technology, cybersecurity, and policy. Say the words.
Technology, cybersecurity, and policy.
Okay, so today, cybersecurity. Let me start off with, and this is part of the test, and you must write a 300-page essay on this one. Not all the armies of the history of the world can stop an idea whose time has come. Not all the armies of the history of the world can stop an idea whose time has come. This was stated by one of the great cyber theoreticians 150 years ago? Okay, almost 200 years ago. Anybody know the name? So, our speaker today is Mr. Tom Kellermann. He's going to talk about the American Cyberinsurgency. A distinguished career. Tom Kellermann, Chief Cybersecurity Officer of Carbon Black. Some of you have heard of that shop. He's going to provide in this presentation the American Insurgency, detailing the threat landscape and what he's seen while being at Carbon Black. Now, here's the funny thing. I was scanning the web, and what I saw was the following. And this is from January 2019, and it says, and this is by Tom Kellermann, it says, in every intelligence industry, there's often a central theme: predicting the future. Predicting the future. We collect and analyze, dissect and interpret, looking for that essential nugget that will give us the edge over our adversaries by indicating what they'll do next. So, Mr. Kellermann has done very interesting work, many interesting experiences. He is the first Hatfield Speaker of the Year, so please welcome Tom Kellermann of Carbon Black.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. Let me give you a little color on where this perspective of mine is coming from. Carbon Black was founded by folks that came out of the NSA and CIA, specifically Tailored Access Unit, which was a euphemism for offensive cyber NSA, especially when a government official says, I want tailored access to that system. Yes, the people that originally created the original Big Brother are some of the founders of Carbon Black. That being said, please do not get caught up in that, because the US no longer has a monopoly on being Big Brother in today's world. The tech giants could be your Big Brother. Chinese, Russians, Israelis, French, British, Canadians all have the capacity to be Big Brother as well, and we need to appreciate that in today's world. Carbon Black created the first endpoint detection and response system used for most cyber threat hunting. In fact, 65% of the world's investigations of cybercrime or espionage use our tool. It's one of our tools. And the reason for that is that we freely distribute our EDR capabilities to most incident response and managed security service providers in the world. For good reason we do that, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. There's only two major players that don't use our capability in their investigations, and that's CrowdStrike and FireEye. You're probably familiar with both. They are competitors of ours, but they provide professional services and we don't. We think that there is an ethical quandary in providing a gravedigger after you sell a bulletproof vest. And I say that in jest. That being said, we are global, we're multinational, and much of the telemetry associated with the investigations conducted with our capabilities, the metadata, anonymized metadata, we are privy to, I am privy to, so I can look at trends of attack over time, as well as nuance to what many of you may already know as the kill chain. But today I'll actually speak to how the kill chain, the Lockheed Martin kill chain, is outdated. And today I will describe to you what what we've been seeing, and what we see is 15 terabytes of threat data every day. I protect Google, I protect Apple, I protect 6 of the major intelligence community members. I protect most of the armed forces commands. And in protecting them, you have to realize that you won't be right 100% of the time. And there's a reason why they'll get around you. And what do? How do you achieve suppression, I would call it? And there's an overarching construct that I'd like for you to pay attention to in this presentation, this speech, which is the construct of intrusion suppression. Okay? So, you may have read work, you may have heard of Dick Clark, the first national security advisor on cyber. He also ran counter-terror for the Bush administration, right? And he said it was all about the digital Pearl Harbor. Well, he was wrong. It's not Pearl Harbor. It's more like Raqqa in Syria. You got a multiplicity of actors in a straight-up free fire zone. And it's gotten worse, not better, in the 22 years I've been doing cybersecurity because of a number of global phenomena, whether it's the increase of geopolitical tension, whether it's the nature in which the best cyber criminals of the world, the Silicon Valley of the East, which is in St. Petersburg, Russia, they've been providing the ultimate new custom attack code to folks. They lease it to people. And do any of you think about this? Why would the best hacker in the world develop the greatest nuanced new weapon in the world and then sell it or lease it without just using it themselves to get into whatever they want? Why? Anyone?
Guaranteed money.
Pardon?
Guaranteed money.
That's part of it.
Less risk.
Okay.
They can make something better.
They can make something better? Go ahead.
The state actors trying to destabilize foreign governments.
That's part of it. One more?
I'd say it's probably because it's legal to sell someone a gun, but if you go and shoot someone yourself, then you get prosecuted for that. So.
All those reasons are valid, but it's not the primary reason. Because if you use the attack code that I've sold to you, or at least to you, whatever you compromise with it, I can be there instantaneously. I can teleport myself, yeah, I'll use that word, into that environment because I have remote administrative access to that capability. So you're running around robbing things and breaking into things with my weapon, and I can manifest myself in that environment immediately without the work, without the risk, without anything. This became even more problematic with shadow brokers. Anyone know what shadow brokers is? Go ahead.
The people who lease the NSA exploits.
That's right. The people that distributed Vault 7's weapons. Vault 7's weapons were the NSA and CIA's capabilities that were specially made to bypass most of the security technologies of today. This became highly problematic. Not only did the government, who, rumor has it, was behind the shadow brokers, benefit from the utility of these capabilities against the West, okay? But also it created this multiplicity of actors in free fire zone with ultimate weapons that could defeat encryption, that could defeat firewalls, that could defeat intrusion protection systems, and that could defeat anything that antivirus is trying to do and had been doing for years over time. The game had changed, fundamentally changed, okay? So, what are we going to do about this? So this presentation is going to highlight how the evolution of attacks have occurred, what we can learn from the adversary, how do we spin that chessboard and create what's called a knight's fort. So global attack origins. China is number one, again, although this alternates between Russia. China's reaction to the trade war, first and foremost, has been increasing cyber attacks against the West, as evidenced by the Cloud Hopper campaign and others. China has essentially unleashed their hounds against the West in a cyber construct as retribution for the trade war, and that was their first stage of retribution. Russia has been burrowing into the West for a long time now, for the purposes of the overarching doctrine called the Gerasimov Doctrine. See, Vladimir Putin challenged his head of strategic command with the question, how do we reassert our significance on the world stage? This happened in 2013 at a Black Sea resort. And General Gerasimov said, well, the West have two Achilles heels. One is their dependence on technology. The other is their dependence on public opinion. And the institutions of the West can be undermined if you undermine those two things. This is not a political conversation. This is straight fact. You can pull down Gerasimov's speech from the internet as we speak. This is compounded by the fact that there's an axis of evil in cyberspace. Because of the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, China and Russia are not only doing joint military exercises, they're sharing backdoors, weaponry, and cyber weapons with each other, and there are two Rottweilers that are North Korea and Iran. North Korea and Iran now have A teams thanks to tech transfer and the professional services of those two benefactors. Fifth on the list is Brazil. And I can explain that later. So, Hidden Cobra. Hidden Cobra is a North Korean group, often associated with the Lazarus group. They are incredibly sophisticated. They are a true A team. It's been well documented that over $2 billion of sanction relief has been leveraged by these hacker groups as they've been targeting Western banks with the ultimate attack code. What's interesting is for a while they were just using Russian munitions and the Russian kill chain, but lately they've become creative and they're developing their own customizable fileless malware with multiple variants like Grafter. They're also combining living off the land techniques or lateral movement techniques like not just PowerShell, but PowerShell, initiating WMI, and other things, for those of you who are familiar, to leverage import and impact on systems. What's scary though, as I'm also a professor of international affairs, is the fact that this is a non-rational actor who now has asymmetrical capabilities and willing to use them, and soon willing to use them in a form not just to offset economic sanctions. Again, you guys are not studying international affairs. You may not care about international affairs, but geopolitical tension now manifests in cyberspace. So whenever you see on the news country X and country Y are not getting along, or statements have been made, or tweets have been released, you will see a cyber manifestation immediately. So what do we do? So I asked the 143 incident response companies and managed security service provider companies, from SecureWorks to Optiv to Red Canary. I'll go down the list, it doesn't really matter. I asked their best investigators and red team members what's changed specific to the last 6 months, and how can we learn from that to not only develop and improve the behavioral analytics for suppression within Carbon Black's capabilities, but inform our customers and partners how they need to change their defensive profile. Right? So how many of you know what a Knight's Fork is? Excellent. Do you mind explaining what a Knight's Fork is?
You basically are going to be in check, and you have more than one of your pieces at risk, so that no matter what you do, you lose the game.
That's right. And the ultimate Knight's Fork to leverage is one where you can force them to sacrifice their queen in order to stay in the game. But the question is, what is the queen in cybersecurity? When you think about it from an adversarial perspective. And we're going to try to discern that from the lessons we learned from my partners. So first of all, island hopping is occurring 50% of the time, and please don't make the mistake of assuming that island hopping is merely someone using your manufacturing supply chain to get to you. And please don't make the mistake of thinking it's merely someone hacking your information supply chain, not just your cloud provider, let's say, or your outside general counsel, or the outside marketing firm, or the university that you do R&D with, et cetera, to get to you. But anyone that's willing to island hop to get to you will use you to island hop. Make sense? It's in their nature. And to that point, we have to appreciate the fact that cybersecurity for the CISOs and CIOs of the world is no longer about the theft of data or just the destruction of data. It's about your brand, your organization now being used to attack your constituency. That's your worst case scenario. That's where you can actually change hearts and minds of leadership and boards and governance and governments when they realize that their digital transformation efforts can now turn against their constituency. And there are 3 forms of island hopping. The obvious one, network-based. It's quite obvious. There's trusted connectivity between networks that are encrypted, and there's an assumption that these things are secure, that specific devices are authenticated, that only righteous users are using those devices, etc., etc. The second is watering hole attacks. That's when your good website has been commandeered, and specific subpages are now pushing never-been-seen-before payloads down the browser's throats of anyone who visits them. And this was done, the first time this was leveraged at a grand scale was the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a very powerful thought leader, quasi-think tank in DC that consists of former secretaries of state from both sides of the aisle, former ambassadors, et cetera, et cetera. And these folks were releasing a report on corruption within the highest ranks of the Chinese government. This happened 9 years ago. And the report they issued on their site was immediately turned into an attack on anyone that downloaded it. And this is happening more often than not now. But most importantly now, we've all heard about business email compromise. The Russians have perfected a new technique called RBEC, which other hacker crews are adopting, called reverse business email compromise. Companies, universities, individuals, we implicitly trust our mail servers so long as they're DMARC enabled, they're running crypto, they've got a DLP on them, and they're not pushing out spam. For those 4 reasons, we implicitly trust that our mail server is within our perimeter, it's doing just what it needs to be doing. But what this attack is they're leveraging fileless malware attacks without malware, using trusted living off the land techniques from your mail server against a specific set of individuals, starting with your board of directors, moving through your outside general counsel, and through your largest partners. And they know implicitly what kind of email would be open, and all it needs is an email to be open, mind you, because they use narrow machine learning to discern the last 3 sentences that were sent between those 2 users over the past couple of weeks. Yes, they're using machine learning too. It's very elegant. And frankly, quite unstoppable if you don't actually have telemetry and you're not capturing the unfiltered data on that mail server beyond just using something like a DLP or logs. So island hopping has even evolved beyond this. We presented this at Black Hat, that an access mining marketplace was created. Yes, of course, it's Russian. They love this technique. This Russian marketplace, though, was created by the My Kings. My Kings are the kind of the digital dons and digerati of the Russian dark web. Okay, these folks have compromised and commandeered so many assets that they're literally seen as cyber militia members for the regime. And they're called upon in order to maintain their untouchable status to target certain entities in the West, from the US to the British to the French, etc. But here, you can actually get access to a specific type of machine within a specific type of organization that they've already profiled for you, and they've already deposited multiple rats, remote access trojans on. And they're also shifting their command and controls on the regular. And what they're doing here is quite interesting in that they are using never been seen before techniques, tactics, and procedures, TTPs, like .text files without payloads to move laterally. Using Steganography again, which is making a huge comeback, etc., etc., etc. I can talk about this ad nauseum, and you can pull down this report from our website, but they are actually doing this type of fingerprinting in general on the device, and most people, most threat researchers assume this was just a crypto mining campaign. But they use crypto mining as almost a mirage, as a facade for a much more detailed and onerous attack methodology. I can go through this, but we have much more important subjects to discover, okay?
Sorry, coders.
So, you can all get access to this presentation, you can have it. So, 70% of the time in investigations we're seeing lateral movement. I'm going to use this metaphor. People are breaking into your house, when they get to your safe, that's great, but now they want to check out each bedroom. Okay? Even though they've gotten to the safe, they still want to check out what's in each bedroom, and they still want to check out who's in each bedroom, etc., etc. And what we're seeing here is more and more often than not, they're using trusted protocols that we all use to administrate systems that are implicitly trusted by systems to be benign and peaceful against the organization. PowerShell, SSH, WMI, .NET, corporate G drives, I can keep going. This is what's called living off the land attacks. And much like I'm sure Rex can tell you, this is all about how you leverage an insurgency against a more powerful adversary. 40% of the time you're seeing a secondary C2 on a sleep cycle. Now think about that. There's a secondary command and control on a sleep cycle. That's because from an incident response perspective, we've been too loud. Back to the home metaphor. For years we've done, oh my God, someone's in my house. Grab the gun, call the cops, turn on the lights. I know you're in my house, I called the cops and I got a gun. You're making 3 terrible assumptions there. Number 1, you're assuming there's one person in your house. 2, you're making the assumption they're afraid of you. And number three, you're making the assumption that they don't want to turn this thing into a home invasion. That's what's changing. Home invasions are happening now, not burglaries. 56% of the time, these awesome IR firms and MSSP firms are dealing with a situation where when they react to an adversary, the adversary is fighting back. They're deleting logs. They're changing timestamps. They're getting rid of subnets. They're then even getting really punitive to leverage wipers, dropping wipers in systems to destroy systems, or using ransomware in a NotPetya style without asking for ransom just to lock you up as you react and respond to them. I do not want any of you to download these programs, I'll preface it. But these are widely available programs that allow you to deploy steganography. Programs that, yes, you can lease. So you too can become Johnny Appleseed or whoever's behind it. The reality here is also there's this huge problem in our industry. A great research project for this university would be, there is still yet not one scalable program in the world that would allow you to identify steganography across all image files on endpoints in real time. Doesn't exist. Which makes steganography such a powerful tool to use. Now granted, steganography was created by the Egyptians. It was widely used World War II and during the Cold War by the Russians to hide messages and images, etc., etc. It's cool, it's sexy. But when you think about using and deploying secondary non-compiled code in it, or secondary C2 on it, that only turns on when the first command and control has been terminated, it's very effective. And you see the problem here is the following. When we terminate that command and control, as most organizations will do when they see it, you're assuming that you kicked them out of the house, and so you're just trying to clean up the mess and write an after-action report specific to the environment, and yet they're still in your house. Make sense? It's twisted, I know. All right. So everyone thinks spear phishing is the #1 vector. It's not. In fact, most attacks nowadays, only 28% of cyber attacks nowadays are using malware. Okay? But 28% of the time, the same number, they're targeting the OT and the IoT of facilities to bypass cybersecurity. Because there's a huge governance issue in our society. Let's just say, who's the head of physical security for this campus? Who runs, no, seriously, who runs, which former FBI agent is the head of physical security for this campus? Anyone know?
It's probably Dan Jones.
Okay. And does this individual speak to the head of cybersecurity on a regular basis vis-a-vis what technology controls they roll out to protect physical security and how those things can be commandeered to bypass cyber?
I won't indict our people in particular, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
And so there's this disconnect, because typically the head of physical security is more powerful than the head of cybersecurity, and they're going to deploy the latest and greatest camera systems, door locking systems, alarm systems, fire suppression systems, heating and cooling systems, you name it, and all these things are probably connected directly to the primary network. You see where I'm going with this? I don't know what to say. It's just the way the world we live in. There's been a 160% increase from last year of destructive attacks. How many of you think this is due to geopolitical tension? Raise your hand. How many people think this is due to the hackers wanting to burn the evidence and punish you for trying to react to them? Raise your hand for the first, geopolitical tension. Okay? You can only get one vote, guys. So, the next one? Burn the evidence, how dare you react to me? I don't know what the answer is. No one knows what the answer is. But it's dramatically increasing. You have forums out there, forums dedicated to distribution and creation of newfangled new types of wipers, new types of ransomware attack techniques. And trust me, ransomware in its greatest utility is not for the purposes of ransom. You can just slow your adversary down to a crawl by encrypting everything NotPetya style and locking them up while you take everything you want. So, cyber criminal behavior has evolved. Starting actually in 2003, they say it's 2011, but it's really 2003 in a classified setting. Lockheed Martin kill chain was developed in order to a response for Operation Titan Rain. Anyone know what Titan Rain was? So Titan Rain was groundbreaking in so much that the Chinese stole the 3 greatest military secrets of the US government. How do you create an ICBM with multiple nuclear warheads? How do you create stealth technology? And how do you create a submarine capable of firing a Trident missile from under the sea? Why are those so important? Because if you look at mutually assured destruction and theories on nuclear warfare, you need those strike capabilities in order to ensure that even if the adversary takes out your entire country, you can still destroy your adversary. Make sense? So that cyber attack campaign that went after the defense industrial base, that went after the major government agencies in the DoD, was the creation and the formative point for this kill chain that since literally 2003, although publicly they'll say 2011, we've been using this kill chain to not only develop cybersecurity technologies, but to respond to an adversary. A very linear chain, as you can see. And then recently, MITRE, which is a nonprofit, which was originally created by the US government to test the efficacy of military weapons before they were deployed to the field, became a cyber vulnerability sharing shop, and then decided that we needed to go beyond sharing vulnerabilities, not undisclosed vulnerabilities, but CVEs associated with vulnerability data, be that repository, that they needed to talk about the TTPs, the techniques, tactics, and procedures used by the advanced persistent threat campaigns so that we as defenders could evolve on the specific tactics being used in the wild. And whereas that's effective, and whereas this is groundbreaking and seminal, its laser focus is really on three types of APTs. And specifically, if you think about it, as much as this is foundational and groundbreaking, it is focused on behaviors, right? Well, hackers aren't animals. What I mean by that is, hackers don't just behave, right? They have a cognition that then manifests multiple behaviors. And how do we get to a stage of prediction where you can judge the cognition and show intent that would demonstrate which combinations of behaviors, or TTPs, or which new TTPs will be leveraged against an adversary? Yeah, like mind reading. No, we're never going to get there, but how do you get predictive on the future combinations of TTPs and or behaviors as someone's trying to attack you? So at Carbon Black, in conjunction with our IR partners, we came up with this construct of the cognitive attack loop. And I think it's important and it is groundbreaking. Okay? Since hackers want to stay inside of you, since they want to conduct a home invasion, since they want to leverage island hopping, since they do counter incident response, since they're willing to destroy some parts of the network, all of these realities, because they move laterally, they attack in phases, but they attack in cycles. And they will repeat a cycle if it's effective on a set target. Make sense? It's not linear. They don't just go in and leave. It's not burglary and then they're gone. They stay in, they keep iterating, and they repeat these cycles, and that's why it's a loop. So the first one is obvious: reconnaissance and infiltration. You're never going to be 100% right to stop this stage, okay? Even government agencies and three-letter agencies are never going to be 100% right to stop this stage, and with the release of weapons from Vault 7, this will never be 100%. So, as much as this is self-evident, I think this second phase is very, very important. It's maintain and manipulate. That's how they conduct cycles on the target. And it's really about focusing on how do they maintain persistence and how do they evade. How are they moving east-west and laterally in an environment? How are they misusing trusted protocols against you? How are they burrowing in deeper into your ecosystem? Remember, they don't need to leverage the initial attack against you. They can easily subscribe to one of those access mining forums just to get the backdoor necessary to automatically manifest phase 2. And if you look at phase 3, it looks very similar to the Lockheed Martin kill chain with the exception of, look, there's two other elements. They will provide disinformation to your system. They will manipulate timestamps. They will delete logs at a minimum. They will choose to destroy evidence if need be. And they will come back at you again. A great example of this third phase, of their desire to maintain persistence was, for years, the FBI and Secret Service because they do all financial crime investigations, were advocating, look, this threat is facing your industry. It's targeting this type of operating system. Why don't you just do a vulnerability scan to see if you're vulnerable to this type of attack, right? Makes sense? that would be proactive. Problem is, the hackers that leverage an exploit against that operating system would patch. They would patch the vulnerability, not because they're afraid of you, not because they knew, and they did know, that this was part of your IR routine, but because they didn't want other hackers climbing through into the house they've just commandeered. You can't make this stuff up.
Selfish.
So, what do? So next generation cybersecurity really has to change because for too long the standards bodies of the world, and I'm friends with Dr. Ron Ross who created the NIST standards, he's a brilliant man, but for too long the defensive standards, the best standards, are focused on defense in depth, which is incredibly viable unless you're dealing with an adversary that's already inside your information supply chain. Okay? And for too long that defense in depth architecture looked like a fortress, right? Just, you know, the moat, the walls, the archers, I mean, whatever you want to use. We all watch Game of Thrones, let's not kid ourselves. So, how do we flip that? How do we invert that based on the threats I'm describing to you? Well, there's actually a construct called intrusion suppression, which is, can you detect, deceive, divert, contain, and hunt an adversary unbeknownst to an adversary? And this has been built in the physical world once before. But in order to build it, you have to be able to capture all the unfiltered data on the endpoint and hold it for days to look at any sort of anomalous behaviors that can provide you with clarity as to root cause of the infiltration, etc., etc. So just see that as your CCTV system, okay? But the physical construct of intrusion suppression is this facility. Anyone know where this is? It's here in Colorado. In Florence, Colorado.
Supermax?
Yeah, this is the original Supermax. And I think it's important that we appreciate why they built the original Supermax. They built the original Supermax because the greatest criminals in the world, forgive me, greatest criminals in the world were sociopaths who were operating at a very high level of IQ and had a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence. And so they would take over the prisons in which they were confined to a point where they would lose control of the prison. And these folks were leveraging criminal conspiracies on the streets. You had prison guards and cops and judges being killed on the streets because the prisoner basically controlled the prison. Granted, they couldn't leave the prison, but they had full control of the prison and their criminal enterprise on the outside. El Chapo is here now, for example. The worst of the worst. The most cerebral of the worst. But this prison was developed not just by architects, my friends, it was developed by social psychologists under the construct of how do you force them to become resource constrained? How do you limit their capacity to move laterally, both physically and mentally? How do you inhibit their capacity to communicate with the outside world? And how do you fracture their capacity to develop relationships, whether they be digital relationships, and I'm speaking metaphorically here, or physical relationships, or emotional relationships with anyone on the inside. So in this construct, this facility sits down a 70-mile-long desert road. One way in, one way out. Okay, that's impressive. Okay, it's got multiple utilities and technologies for motion sensors and the whole nine, etc., etc. I hope they're segregated from the primary network. Ha ha ha. The prisoner moves between cell blocks through tunnels with guards that wear masks with headsets. So the guards can't even communicate with the person, nor can the prisoner identify which guard took them to their 45 minutes a day of fresh air. Because in the Geneva Convention, the prisoner needs 45 minutes a day or an hour of fresh air. Where they get their fresh air is a pit in the prison yard covered by a lattice metal fence thing, where they stare at the same blue sky that they can see from their cell through a 45-degree slit that stares at the same desert blue sky that never changes. They have no perspective on where they are in that prison. They have no perspective of who they communicate with in that prison. They have no way to figure out how to move inside the prison or to get out of the prison, should they even have people that want to come in and get them out. That is the experience that we need to share with the hacker community when they hack our networks. So, forget this part, because I'm giving this presentation next week. In order to achieve that, you have to be able to get true visibility as to everything that's occurring on your endpoints, across your infrastructure, and your cloud environments, period. And that's not logging. You need to understand everything that's happened on that device, and you need to store that over time so that at the minimum, when something does happen, and it will, specific to the power of your brand or the partnership that you just put out a press release on, or the corporate logo that you put on your website because you're proud to say they're involved with you, you need to be able to understand root cause and suppress that fundamental phenomenon. And I think what's changing in cyber now, in terms of the defenders reacting, is we're sharing more information. Whether or not we're competitors, it doesn't matter. And that information is not limited to this piece of malware. Again, malware is a munition. See it as a munition. It's a munition. That's awesome. But how did the sniper take the shot to begin with? Okay? And how did they know I'd be in that position to take the shot on? And those things are called watch lists. And there are hundreds of companies sharing these watch lists that show combinations of TTPs and the cognitions and the attempt against specific industry verticals. And if you're going to get into cybersecurity, I highly recommend you get into the communities that share watch lists, because you'll never be 100% right. Okay? And just remember that your priority will always be protecting the misuse of the brand to attack your customers and partners and government agencies. If you're dealing with an uphill battle, from a governance perspective, you're dealing with CIOs or the bosses of CISOs. Okay? It's like in football, forgive me for using the metaphor, but in football, it's like your offensive coordinator is the boss of your defensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator is going to go for it on 4th and 1 every time. Okay? Which may put you in a precarious position. That app will just be rolled out without conducting OWASP top 10 tests on it. But wait, that's for websites. No, mobile apps are also vulnerable to the OWASP top 10 attacks. And you should not allow this third-party company to roll this thing out without writing into the contract that they should be testing for those vulnerabilities and remediating those vulnerabilities prior to rolling that out. That's just an example. You should not just be choosing the cheapest cloud infrastructure to go with, in a public sense, to increase efficiencies and resiliency and access to data. It shouldn't be that way anymore. You should really understand what their security strategy is before you do that, just as from a business perspective. And that goes way beyond encryption. And remember, encryption, regardless of what form it takes, the key, the capacity to authenticate and unlock the encryption will be stored on an endpoint, whether it be mobile or traditional. And if you can compromise that endpoint, you can ride that encrypted tunnel through, and in fact, you can use it to give you cover from any sort of investigations or forensics, because no one's going to unlock all their crypto to figure out, well, what happened here? No. Okay? And blockchain, just for the record, is merely distributed public key infrastructure. So if you really want to understand the vulnerabilities of blockchain and the brilliance of the Japanese scientist who created it, know that he came out of the PKI industry, he made it distributed, and the same vulnerabilities exist. If you can't protect the exchange, and if you can't protect the key, you got nothing. And with that, I'll open up for questions.
So, please, let's thank our speaker. Questions, comments, assertions, philosophical entreaties, hand in the back.
I was wondering why it is that we can't ID stenography across endpoints.
Without what?
I was wondering why it is that we can't ID stenography across endpoints.
Because there's so many image files on endpoints nowadays, number one. Number two is you can't just look for those telltale signs that I described earlier, the size of the file, the different names of the file, etc. There's nuanced new ways of burrowing into the pixels of the image file to produce that manifestation. And then because of video, you add a certain layer of complexity where you can deposit steganography. For example, Graham Crab, which is one of the capabilities that you all should not download, yada yada. That allows you to embed steganography into video as well. So because most people are allowed to have images and videos on their devices, and because there's no way to scale, because of the size of these images, because of the nature in which some of these images are animated, it just becomes incredibly difficult. In fact, numerous attack vectors were demonstrated at Black Hat, which is the #1 hacker conference in the world, in DEF CON recently, about the use of emojis to hack people. Yeah. And most people are like, emoji attack. Well, no, you can have an emoji attack now. Yes?
I have a question. So why is it that we can't use image processing that you can do nowadays with machine learning?
So let's actually have a true conversation about machine learning and artificial intelligence, okay? I'm very grateful that IBM and Google are my customers. And I'm very grateful for the work that they do for the next generation of wide AI and the future of singularity as it relates to AI in general and machine learning. But remember, there's a critical vulnerability in all machine learning tenets and AI, which is if you can't protect the integrity of the input, then you can't necessarily always trust the manifestation of the AI. That makes sense? The AI is contextually picking up on various inputs and stimulus from the environments it's deployed in or it has access to. And so machine learning is effective to a point specific to one type of steganography, if that was the most prevalent type of steganography, but because of the fact that you can create variations of steganography, I mean, honestly, I want this problem solved, and I'd love for this to be a research endeavor of the university as a whole. And I don't have the answer, but right now, currently, as we stand here, it does not exist. Maybe you'll come up with the answer someday. So that'd be great. Yeah.
You said geopolitical tensions now manifest in cyberspace. Was there a point in time where that grew or where they didn't manifest in cyberspace, and why is that the case?
Yeah, so, well, they started manifesting in cyberspace in 2014. That's when they truly, like, before it was just espionage. Cyberspace was for the purposes, geopolitical tension would manifest in the purpose of espionage, traditional espionage leveraged through signals intelligence. Now, with information warfare, now with disinformation campaigns, now with the capacity to destroy infrastructure and the dependency of the West on technology, you're seeing more and more of this. A great example was Operation Pawn Storm, or as you might know it, Fancy Bear, began in earnest after economic sanctions were leveraged against Russia by Secretary of State Clinton. It was an immediate reaction, but what's interesting about that attack campaign, you got to give them credit, is they recognized that they didn't have the technical chops that we did, and so they called upon their cyber criminal community to act against specific targets, and that's why you see these people that are named in economic sanctions and others who were basically not part of the government. And so this type of pax mafiosa between criminals and the state in order to further ambitions has only been seen once before in world history, and that was in Latin America with the drug cartels. In South America, specifically in the 70s and 80s, if you've seen Narcos. So beyond that, I think it's interesting, in some countries of the world, they're realizing that their best hackers, cyber criminals, can operate, and they'll give them untouchable status from Western law enforcement so long as they abide by the 3 rules. All right, the 3 rules are, you don't hack anything within the sovereign boundaries of this country. Period. The second rule is, if you find something that could be useful to us, you share it. Backdoor the system, etc., etc. And then lastly, when we call upon you to pay homage to the regime to go after a range of targets, you'll do it. But it's not limited to that. See, I wish it was just nation state on nation state, because then maybe you could create international norms and you can create deterrence from that. But you have all major non-state actor and transnational actor groups are involved now. I was just in Singapore. Okay, the head of Interpol gave a speech saying that street crime globally is down 10%. That's not because more people are going to church. It's because traditional criminals are realizing, well, I can download the ransomware capability right there, and I can make a ton of money. Or I can just do crypto mining over here. Or, no, seriously, or I can just go work, and the best ones are being pulled into the major organized crime syndicates. And all the major criminal syndicates of the world, the big 7, we can name them here for fun, or we can not, they have divisions dedicated to hacking. And those hacking divisions are not just for the purpose of financial gain. Those divisions are used for money laundering. A tremendous amount of money laundering occurs through various alternative payment channels. Alternative payment channels because they're not all digital currencies, whether it's web money, whether it's Monero, whether it's Litecoin. I can keep going. Obviously Bitcoin. You don't want to launder the proceeds of traditional crimes. You've got counterintelligence against law enforcement and law enforcement initiatives. And then lastly, you have financial gain. But what's scary is also you're seeing in places like Mexico and others where there's a lot of targeted assassinations of individuals, some of that has been facilitated by the mobile phone location beaconing. That's scary. And that's really what's changed. If you hack me, or if I hack you right now, that's cool, but maybe not. But more importantly, I can hack your reality. I can manifest in your environment. I can essentially pop the mic, right, specific to location or calendar settings, and have it record. I don't even need to be sitting there listening to that. I just take it in. And so these types of capabilities are widely available, and so you're seeing street criminals and the rest move in this direction. There's a lot of money to be made in cybersecurity, but note that the total addressable market for cybersecurity industry is about $100 billion versus the total addressable market of the dark web is $1 trillion according to the World Economic Forum. So honestly, as a defender, we are being outgunned, and frankly, the very best cybersecurity talent in the world is going to the dark side. And granted, if you go to the dark side, you'll never get to see a nice beach again. And it's not a joke. It's basically how Secret Service and FBI arrest some of the best hackers in the world because they're stupid enough to go to countries that have nice beaches that have extradition treaties with the US. In fact, there is a section of that country's website that specifically warns you not to go to certain beaches because they have extradition treaties with the US. Can't make this up. But look, there's a lot of opportunity. And please remember, you don't have to be a hardcore coder. You don't need to be a pen tester. You don't need to be a threat hunter in order to make money in cybersecurity. There's a tremendous amount of need for people who can translate, forgive me for saying it, technical babble to risk management and brand protection. There's a tremendous opportunity for you to get into any field and any industry, and as long as you understand the threat landscape to that industry, as long as you understand the technological infrastructure of that industry and the compliance and regulatory guidelines of that industry, you will have a job because you can speak cyber.
Any other? Yes, please.
So, giant corporations obviously have chief security officers. They have budgets, they have the ability to do this is their job, that's great. So much of the US economy is small business. They don't have bandwidth for this. Are there options? Is anybody looking at developing tools that evolve but that are for lay users who are convinced they don't understand?
Yeah, I mean, so the giant corporations with big budgets and all that, typically not always do they have, and most of the time they don't have the right governance structure, where the CISO has been elevated to have their separate line budgets, separate authorities, veto power on CIO initiatives that could result in any kind of risk to the organization, and direct consult to the CEO or board. What's changing now is that you have cyber board members, cyber savvy people joining boards of publicly traded companies, which is a step in the right direction, but it's still not there yet. From just a governance perspective, you gotta appreciate like the world we live in. As much as you may hate governance, it does make sense to you, it's stupid. Screw the machine. It has to be there in this regard to change the mindset. But they are also, those large companies are facing and dealing with not just the greatest hackers in the world because of their brand, and because island hopping is the norm now, and they want to use that platform to attack their constituency. They're dealing with nation states who are not only going after their research and development, but also want to island hop through their infrastructure to touch every American or every individual from that country who touches that infrastructure. The small, medium businesses need to appreciate the fact that it's in their long-term best interest for the sustainability of their interest. And especially this whole argument about brand protection, because their brand is everything to a small business because they really don't have anywhere else to go, to invest in cybersecurity up front. My recommendation to them is don't buy one-off security solutions, to buy a platform that provides you with a myriad of solutions to protect yourself. My other recommendation for them is you should go to the cloud. Because at a small business, if you don't have a security operations center, and you don't have the level of maturity, and you don't have a true hunt team or a real security operations team, like most of the large ones do, you would benefit dramatically from going to one cloud versus another. But again, not all clouds are equal. And when you think of cloud, you have to think about a really nice condo building that is in a really, really tough neighborhood. And some buildings will provide you with a concierge and a guard and key fob access to the top floors. You're still going to be responsible for the security of your unit or your apartment. If your neighbor has a house party and a sociopath comes over, you still need to make sure your door's locked. Okay, cockroaches can flourish. Someone can be a pyromaniac and set the building on fire. They're not going to protect you from that. So you still need to protect your applications and your endpoints specifically from attacks, even if you're using a good public cloud.
Sometimes there seems to be a gap between what we learn in school and then the real world. Is there anything that you can provide us that would help bridge that gap?
Well, first of all, I'm here out of respect for the program. I don't know a lot of things. I can tell you there are some additional resources that you can visit on a regular basis. The SANS Institute, SANS, is phenomenal for training and thoughtfulness. It's training specific to like threat hunting or forensics, stuff like that. Dark Reading is the very best publication on cybersecurity for a number of reasons. You can go high level, mushy mush, to deep dive, all in. Dark Reading is also attached to Black Hat and DEF CON. They are the same company. And so most of the editors, most of the journalists are truly cyber savvy. And most of the people who contribute and speak to them are some of the most thoughtful people in the world with regard to cyber attacks. Both of those are incredible resources. And then for the international audience or for international cyber, I would go to Information Security Magazine. And again, in the international domain, this is information security. I think it's an important distinction to make when we call it cybersecurity here in the US, because this is the reason why we don't have a treaty on international cybersecurity. And the reason for that is, overseas, information security, especially in the G77, whose leaders are Russia and China, any kind of additional information you add to a host or a system could be seen as an attack. Thus, freedom of speech through digital means, even a search or a text or an email or whatever, could be seen as an attack. Because the West believes in freedom of speech, we see it as cyber, which is essentially, if you break into my bottle, that's an attack. Okay? But if you add data that's not evil to my bottle, it's not an attack. Whereas they're saying, if you add water to the bottle, and we don't agree with the water, it's an attack. So we'll never get to a point where there's a treaty or international norms on cyber, which is why you have so many, this multiplicity of actors, which is why you have this free fire zone, and then some countries use the malevolent third-party actors as proxies to confangle the West. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that you were talking about the chief of the physical security versus the chief of cybersecurity. How physical gets priority and is usually the boss.
That's because terrorism is the number one concern, and in these environments as well, mass shootings are very prominent concerns, as they should be, and thus they are deploying technology left and right to thwart those two major kinetic threat vectors.
Right. And before I came here to see you, actually, I was Air Force Special Operations, and my AO was Southeast Asia. And I found that within the last 2 years of my work there, probably 90%, that may be a little too high, but probably 90% of our tasking and our training was going away from the physical stuff and the shooting and the bombing and the airstrikes on it, and going towards the internet and the cyber collection. And we were being tasked, we were being transitioned from knuckle-dragging operators into something probably more like your background. They wanted to push us into like the
That's great.
CIA intelligence kind of work. My question I'm curious about is, what kind of weighting would you give to cyber versus physical? Because I felt like we were going forward into a world where it's all cyber, and that's what matters. And that's what got me interested in coming here and studying this kind of stuff. And then with that in mind, my part two of the question is, for a beginner who's just getting started, you mentioned like the DEF CON, the Black Hat stuff, how can we get our feet wet without drowning? Because I feel like if I go to a DEF CON thing, my phone and my laptop's going to get...
Yeah, it will. And it will.
You should take a different phone.
Yeah. They actually have something called the wall of sheep for people who go to these conferences and they're not practicing what they preach. and their most recent emails and texts are just portrayed, and their username and identity and authentication is portrayed, and their home router information is put up on this thing. It's crazy. But to your point, given the conflicts currently facing the West that are kinetic, they're dealing with an adversary who is sophisticated from a human perspective but not sophisticated from a signals intelligence or cyber perspective. So we've had the focus in terms of the existing conflicts that are occurring in the world. You're dealing with an adversary that wasn't capable of some of the types of attacks. And any of the computer scientists that existed within those adversarial groups that were leveraging attacks, like Irahabi 007 and some others, were destroyed by drone strikes correspondingly after they showed themselves on the internet. Now that all being said, the future conflicts are probably going to be against one or two of the actors that I've named here. They are highly sophisticated, and they have done things that I've described here that they've burrowed into such wide swaths of the American or Western IT infrastructure. For example, right now, like the government of India and the Indian companies are hemorrhaging because, first of all, the Chinese and Indians have never gotten along. And the main reason the Chinese have supported Pakistan for years is because they're trying to offset the growth and power of India. That's just true. But now they're actually coming out on guns blazing into the IT infrastructure of India because India's doing so well, prospering, right, and all the rest of it. They also know that there's a direct connection between India and all major US tech companies. So I think the future of warfare, and Rex, correct me, is missiles and drones, and all those things are governed by cyber. And yet you don't even need to leverage a kinetic attack against an adversary in today's world if you have cyber high ground. I think there's also a great deal of concern should be paid to the fact that one of the most strategic world leaders that anyone's ever seen in the history of the world, Vladimir Putin, said that the #1 way to become the global hegemon will be to dominate artificial intelligence. Now the real question you have to ask yourself is, dominate artificial intelligence, does that mean you build it, or does that mean you commandeer it? I don't have the answer.